Big eyes blinked in the direction of the bathroom. Boys take showers quickly within 5 minutes. The bathroom door opened with a click. Chen Yang's hair was still dripping with water, so he just wiped it casually and used the hair dryer, and it dried in no time. His eyes were immediately drawn to the scene on the bed. On the pure white bed, Lin Xingyi curled up in the quilt like a little animal, with only her little face and a pair of bright big eyes showing, just looking at him. Is this warming my bed? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Chen Yang immediately felt his face getting hot. He pretended to be relaxed. Xingyi, you made the bed so clean. Lin Xingyi nodded slightly. Her voice soft. Those paddles in red cloth look so weird. Chen Yang smiled awkwardly and walked to the other side of the bed. After hesitating for a moment, he also lifted the quilt and crawled in. The bed was very big, and the two of them tacitly occupied half of it each, leaving a small distance in between. The room was so quiet that only the sound of each other's breathing could be heard. Chen Yang turned sideways and looked at Lin Xingyi's back, feeling an inexplicable tenderness in his heart. Xingyi, he said softly, good night. There is everything in dreams. So you won't be embarrassed when you fall asleep. Maybe you can even simulate practice in a dream. In the bed, Lin Xingyi gently placed her small hands on her soft and elastic chest. There, a deer-like heart was beating wildly, as if it was about to burst out of the chest. Bang, 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 bang. The rapid heartbeat was transmitted through the palm of the hand, and was particularly clear in the silent night. Lin Xingyi was even worried that Chen Yang beside her would hear it. Lin Xingyi tried to calm her disordered breathing. Since I held Chen Yang's hand that day, why have my thoughts become more and more bold? Lin Xingyi was secretly surprised in her heart, and the scene of the night market that day kept appearing in her mind. The feeling of security and excitement is still unforgettable. She thought of the little rabbit in the trap again. Chen Yang said he didn't have time to raise it, so he gave it to his parents and didn't know what happened to it. After holding hands, I always fantasize about more. Lin Xingyi bit her lower lip, mustered up her courage, and quietly moved towards Chen Yang under the quilt. The sound was as light as a feather falling, for fear of waking up the person next to him. Slowly, she crossed the light and moved closer to Chen Yang little by little, until she could feel the warmth coming from him. Chapter 57. Crossing the line or testing. Taking a deep breath, Lin Xingyi gently snuggled into Chen Yang's arms. His movements were cautious, like a kitten afraid of disturbing its owner. Chen Yang closed his eyes and felt the movement beside him. It was a slight sound, and then there was another person in his arms. Lin Xingyi's warm breath lingered on his neck, bringing a tingling sensation. The soft hair gently brushed across his chin, tickling him and making him want more. The girl exuded a faint fragrance, mixed with a hint of the scent of the hotel's shower gel. Like a flower that had just bloomed in spring, fresh and attractive. Lin Xingyi saw Chen Yang open his eyes, and carefully reached out her hand and put it around Chen Yang's neck. She raised her head, and in the dim warm yellow light of a night lamp, Chen Yang could vaguely see her sparkling eyes. Lin Xingyi's voice was as light as a breeze, yet it carried a hint of unprecedented temptation. Chen Yang, I want a kiss. There was a hint of trembling in her words, yet they were full of anticipation. Lin Xingyi pursed her lips slightly, her eyes half closed, her eyelashes trembling gently, like to small fans. Chen Yang felt his heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and the blood in his body seemed to be boiling. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. Reason told him that Lin Xingyi was still suffering from depression. Chen Yang raised his hand and gently pressed his index finger against Lin Xingyi's chin, stopping her from getting any closer. No, Xingyi. Chen Yang's voice was gentle but firm. Wait until you recover, okay? Chen Yang felt that this was the best time he had ever controlled a gun in his life. After saying that, he gently stroked Lin Xingyi's hair, as if he was comforting a small animal. Be good, not now. A hint of disappointment flashed across Lin Xingyi's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by understanding. In fact, it was pretty much what she expected. She nodded slightly, a blush appearing on her face. Chen Yang breathed a sigh of relief, and at the same time quietly adjusted his posture, secretly moving his waist slightly away from Lin Xingyi. He didn't want to make things more awkward. Go to sleep. Xingyi, get up early tomorrow, Chen Yang said softly, with a hint of helpless doting in his tone. They were almost there, and there was no need to get up early. So Chen Yang wanted to coax Lin Xingyi to go to bed early. Stop torturing him. Lin Xingyi nodded obediently and buried her face in Chen Yang's chest. Listening to Chen Yang's strong heartbeat and the blood rushing inside, the rhythm made her feel at ease. Lin Xingyi had actually anticipated that Chen Yang would not agree to her kiss request. She said that she wanted to kiss him, but deep down in her heart, it was more of a test. When Chen Yang gently but firmly refused, she felt a warm feeling in her heart. If you really get kissed, there's nothing to regret. After all, you offered it yourself. Sure enough, Chen Yang is still the reliable Chen Yang. Lin Xingyi thought silently in her heart, and a faint smile unconsciously appeared on the corner of her mouth. At this time, Chen Yang moved his body slightly, probably to find a more comfortable position. Lin Xingyi felt her hair being pulled gently. She moaned softly, her sweet tone a little different from that during the day. Chen Yang, you're pressing on my hair. This sentence was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, instantly causing ripples in Chen Yang's heart. His heartbeat suddenly quickened, and countless images involuntarily emerged in his mind. Sweet couples in EV dramas, heartwarming scenes in novels, and those beautiful pictures that only exist in imagination. Isn't this the sentence you would only hear when you were sleeping in the same bed with the one you love? Chen Yang felt his cheeks starting to get hot and the tips of his ears turn red. In the past, even if I felt embarrassed, I could pretend on the surface and not react that strongly. My heart seemed to be gently squeezed by an invisible hand, and it was a little difficult to breathe. Oh, sorry. Chen Yang apologized hurriedly, with a barely perceptible tremor in his voice. He moved his body carefully, afraid of hurting Lin Xingyi again. Lin Xingyi looked at Chen Yang's helpless look. She didn't expect him to have such a big reaction. She couldn't help but burst out laughing. Under the dim light, her eyes curved into two crescents, with the narrow corners of her eyes slightly upturned. You, Lin Xingyi said softly, her voice full of doting. She stretched out her hands, and her slender arms were like two white jade lotus roots, gently embracing Chen Yang's head. Her fingers gently ran through Chen Yang's hair, stroking it lightly, and her fingertips brushed across Chen Yang's earlobe, bringing a tingling sensation. Chen Yang, you are so handsome. Lin Xingyi's voice was as light as a breeze, yet filled with a strong sweetness. This unexpected compliment made Chen Yang stunned for a moment. He felt his heart, which had just calmed down, skip a beat, and then started beating even faster. Chen Yang never thought that a few simple words could make him so moved. No way, there are so many handsome guys out there. Chen Yang stammered, trying to act natural, but he couldn't hide the throbbing in his heart. He felt his face getting even hotter, and he wished he could find a place to bury himself. Lin Xingyi looked at Chen Yang's shy look and thought he was so cute, completely different from his usual narcissistic self. She couldn't help but touch Chen Yang's ears again, feeling their increasing temperature. It's really handsome, Lin Xingyi said softly, her tone full of seriousness. After Lin Xingyi emphasized this, Chen Yang felt even more embarrassed. He gently held Lin Xingyi's hands and took them away from his face. Okay, stop it. Chen Yang pretended to be serious, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but rise. Go to bed quickly, you have to get up early tomorrow. Lin Xingyi nodded obediently, but there was still a cunning light in her eyes. She adjusted her posture, found a comfortable position in Chen Yang's arms, and then gently closed her eyes. Good night, Chen Yang, she said softly. Perhaps it was because of Chen Yang's presence that Lin Xingyi felt extremely safe and she could fall asleep quickly without taking sedatives. Before long, her breathing became long and even. Chen Yang listened attentively, and after confirming that Lin Xingyi had fallen asleep, he breathed a sigh of relief. Just as Chen Yang turned his back and adjusted his posture to prepare to fall asleep, he suddenly felt the person next to him move. Lin Xingyi unconsciously moved closer to him in her dream. Her soft body pressed against his back. Oh no! Chen Yang's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Lin Xingyi dreamed of a huge stuffed toy in the dream. Her arms tightly wrapped around the waist of the stuffed bear, and her round legs unconsciously wrapped around it. Chen Yang clearly felt the soft touch from behind, and the gentle pressure on his back. It was a wonderful feeling he had never experienced before. Lin Xingyi's cheek was pressed against Chen Yang's back, and her warm breath came through the thin pajamas, making Chen Yang feel numb. Chen Yang was about to fall asleep, but now his body was stiff and he dared not even breathe. My heart was beating so fast that it seemed like it was going to jump out of my chest. My mind kept telling myself to stay calm, but every cell in my body seemed to be clamoring for excitement. Calm down, Chen Yang muttered silently in his heart. Chapter 58, Grand Secretary. However, every time he tried to calm down, Lin Xingyi would move slightly unconsciously, making Chen Yang's efforts fail. This kind of torment lasted for a long time, and Chen Yang felt that every second was like a year. After an unknown amount of time, fatigue gradually overcame the nervousness and excitement. Chen Yang's eyelids became heavier and heavier, and his consciousness began to blur. His last thought before falling asleep was, I hope it won't be too embarrassing when I wake up tomorrow. When the sunlight poured into the room through the gap in the curtains, Chen Yang slowly opened his eyes. It took him a few seconds to realize where he was and why he felt so warm and comfortable. Lin Xingyi still maintained the same sleeping posture, hugging him tightly. Chen Yang turned around carefully and looked at the girl who was sleeping beside him. The lighting in the room was good. Lin Xingyi's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her fair cheeks were faintly flushed, and there was a sweet smile at the corners of her mouth. Chen Yang looked at the scene, gently reached out and pushed a strand of hair on Lin Xingyi's forehead behind her ear. "Xingyi, wake up." Chen Yang called softly, "It's time to get up." Lin Xingyi slowly opened her eyes, and when she realized that she was hugging Chen Yang tightly, she subconsciously returned to her normal state, and her face instantly turned red to her ears. "Oh, sorry." She hurriedly let go of his hand, her voice filled with deep apology and shyness. But after waking up, Lin Xingyi no longer felt so embarrassed when she thought about how Chen Yang looked last night. Lin Xingyi looked at Chen Yang with an evasive look. Chen Yang's eyes were a little vague, and he smiled and shook his head. "It's okay, did you sleep well?" Lin Xingyi nodded, the blush on her face still not fading. "Yeah, I slept well." The two looked at each other and then immediately looked away. "Shall we go have breakfast then?" Chen Yang suggested. "I remember there is a buffet breakfast on the first floor of the hotel." Lin Xingyi nodded and began to tidy up her messy hair after getting up, pressing down a few disobedient hairs. Chen Yang got up and went to wash up first. It was already past 9 in the morning when we arrived at the restaurant on the first floor of the hotel. The sunlight shines in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, giving the entire space a golden hue. The two sat in the restaurant on the first floor of the hotel, chose a seat, and enjoyed a hearty breakfast. Chen Yang looked at Lin Xingyi, watching her eat the meat floss bread in small bites. Lin Xingyi's movements were graceful and cute. She tore off a small piece of bread and put it in her mouth, chewing it carefully. Occasionally, some tiny pieces of meat floss would stick to the corners of her mouth, and she would gently lick them off with the tip of her pink tongue. This unconscious action made Chen Yang a little dazed. "Xingyi, have some porridge," Chen Yang said gently. "Bread alone is not enough." Lin Xingyi nodded and obediently took the bowl of porridge handed to her by Chen Yang. She held the bowl in both hands and drank from it in small sips. Her fair cheeks were slightly flushed due to the heat, making her look particularly cute. After breakfast, the two checked out. Chen Yang paid 520 via WeChat, including breakfast for the room. Restarting the journey, the white Volkswagen drove onto the highway in the middle section of Yanxi City. After a while, we arrived at our destination, Huyuan City, and got off the highway. As time went by, I gradually left the bustling city. After getting off the highway, we drove on a national highway for a while, then drove into a narrow road in the town, and finally turned into a winding country road. The scenery outside the car window gradually became simple and natural. The rice fields shine softly in the sun like the endless scale of cultivation in the plains. The mountainous southeast is home to only small patches of rice. Occasionally you can see farmers bending over to work. The mountains in the distance are undulating and shrouded in a thin mist. Like an ink painting, the willows on the roadside sway gently in the wind, and the leaves made rustling sounds. This is typical rural scenery in southeastern China, peaceful and harmonious. As the road became more and more remote, Lin Xingyi, who was sitting in the passenger seat, felt a sense of inexplicable uneasiness. "It's such a remote place, where exactly is Chen Yang taking me?" Lin Xingyi secretly glanced at Chen Yang, who was concentrating on driving, and suddenly an absurd idea popped up in her mind. Could it be that you are going to sell me out? As soon as this idea appeared, it spread in Lin Xingyi's mind like wildfire. She began to have wild thoughts. "That's not right. If Chen Yang really needed money, he wouldn't have taken it when I gave it to him before. And then if he really needs money, I can give it to him." Chen Yang could see the changes in Lin Xingyi's expression from the corner of his eye. He was a little confused. "Xingyi, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell?" Lin Xingyi came back to her senses and shook her head hurriedly. "And nothing, I was just wondering where we were going." Chen Yang smiled mysteriously. "It's almost there. You'll know soon enough." The car continued driving on the winding mountain road, turning several times, and finally arrived at a quiet village. The village is not small, it is considered the largest in the surrounding area. At the entrance of the village, a huge bluestone stands on the roadside, with 3 powerful characters, "Tai King Village," engraved on it. The writing was traced in bright red paint, which was particularly eye-catching in the sun. "Arrive." Chen Yang was a little excited. "This is where I lived when I was a kid." Lin Xingyi looked at the scene in front of her, and her inner uneasiness gradually dissipated. She realized that Chen Yang was bringing her to meet his family, and felt a little embarrassed. A white Volkswagen sedan slowly drove into Tai King Village, attracting the attention of the villagers. Several elderly people who were chatting at the entrance of the village looked up and looked curiously at the somewhat unfamiliar car, whose license plate seemed somewhat familiar. "Hey, whose young man is this coming back?" an old man wearing a straw hat said, squinting his eyes and looking carefully. "It looks like the car of old Chen's family." Another old man with a cane responded. "What's the name of his son who lives in the city?" "Is it Jianjin?" the third old man interrupted. "I heard he's a policeman in a big city." The car drove slowly, and not long after, Chen Yang parked the car next to a spacious yard. In the countryside, parking is never a problem. You can park anywhere. On the roadside or in front of the yard, it is much more convenient than in the city. Chen Yang turned off the engine, turned to Lin Xingyi and said with a smile, "Home." Chen Yang was still a little worried that Lin Xingyi was shy. Lin Xingyi nodded, looking nervously at the strange and simple environment outside the window. The buildings in sight are much smaller than those in Linjiang City, and are mixed with the natural scenery. Chen Yang noticed her uneasiness. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." After saying that, he quickly got out of the car and walked around to the passenger side to open the door for Lin Xingyi. Lin Xingyi stepped out of the car carefully, and Chen Yang immediately reached out to hold her arm, and took her to the new environment. "I'll get my luggage." As Chen Yang spoke, he walked quickly to the trunk, picked up Lin Xingyi's suitcase with one hand and picked up his backpack with the other. His movements were neat and gentlemanly. Just a few steps into the yard, a loud woof-woof sound was heard. A huge tan wolfhound was running towards them. The two dots on the wolfdog's eyebrows are of different colors, making it look ferocious. Chapter 59. Why are you here too? "Oh, rhubarb," Chen Yang shouted, and moved sideways to block Lin Xingyi, afraid that she would be scared, but there was no panic on his face. He quickly put down his luggage and prepared to meet this furry old friend. Da Huang rushed to Chen Yang aggressively, growling and baring his teeth. But he was not so fierce when he got closer. Chen Yang was not in a hurry. He raised his legs and pushed Da Huang's body away, jokingly saying, "Why, you don't recognize me after just a few years?" After being pushed away, Da Huang pounced on him again. This time, he came closer and smelled Chen Yang carefully. After a while, Da Huang's eyes became clear, his tail began to wag wildly, and he let out excited whimpers. "That's right." Chen Yang smiled and squatted down, rubbing Da Huang's head. "I'm back, and it's time to improve your food." Lin Xingyi was stunned as she watched from the side, feeling both scared and amazed. Dogs must be kept on a leash in cities, and large dogs like this are rare, because they are difficult to raise. Chen Yang took Lin Xingyi's hand. "Don't be afraid. Da Huang is very friendly." Hearing the geese calling not far away, Chen Yang's expression suddenly changed, and a complicated look flashed in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Lin Xingyi keenly noticed the changes in Chen Yang. It's okay. Hearing this sound, Chen Yang remembered the time when he was chased by a goose when he was a child. It hurts to be bitten by this thing. If his cousin hadn't arrived in time and grabbed the goose's neck, Chen Yang might have been in great trouble. At that time, Chen Yang was 7 years old, and Xiao Qinghan was already 16. Lin Xingyi still doesn't know that her psychologist Xiao Qinghan is Chen Yang's cousin. Chen Yang covered it up for a moment, not wanting others to know about his embarrassing childhood experience. "The goose is very fierce, but don't worry, I will protect you." Lin Xingyi felt the warmth coming from the palm of her hand, and the uneasiness she felt because of the unfamiliar environment dissipated a little. "Grandpa, Grandma, I'm back!" Chen Yang shouted loudly in the local dialect, his voice full of joy. Grandpa and Grandma mean Grandpa and Grandma. The courtyard opens to the south, and sunlight pours in unobstructed, giving the entire space a warm golden hue. At the northernmost end of the yard, a 3-story modern rural self-built house stands tall. The exterior walls of the house are painted with light yellow latex paint, and the large floor-to-ceiling windows reflect the dazzling sunlight. The current rural architectural style no longer looks rural, but instead has the feel of a small villa. The yard is not big, but it is well tidy. Next to the yard, there is a small vegetable patch that is lush and green. Various seasonal vegetables are growing well, demonstrating the owner's careful care. The security door of the house was pushed open with a click, and Chen Yang's grandparents came out when they heard the sound. "Yan Yang is back." Grandma's voice was full of joy. She walked quickly towards Chen Yang. The wrinkles on her face relaxed and she showed a kind smile. Chen Yang let go of Lin Xingyi's hand and stepped forward. "Grandmother." Grandma Chen Yang patted him on the back, then looked at him carefully. "You've lost so much weight. Is it because you didn't eat well in the city?" Chen Yang scratched his head embarrassedly. "No, I eat very well." Grandma sighed softly. "Why didn't your parents come back with you? You didn't even go home." Chen Yang quickly explained to his parents so that he could take credit for it later. "Grandma, don't blame them. Mom and Dad are really busy at work. So I came back to see you and Grandpa." Grandpa also came over at this time. Although his face was not as excited as Grandma's, he could not hide the joy in his eyes. He patted Chen Yang on the shoulder, his voice low and powerful. "It's good to be back, it's good to be back." Several people were communicating in dialect. Lin Xingyi tilted her head beside them, looking like she didn't quite understand. At this time, Chen Yang noticed that an old man came out of the house. It was his Grandpa Huang. Although Grandpa Huang is old, His back is still straight, the wrinkles on his face are full of vicissitudes of life, but also reveal a sense of determination. Grandpa Huang. Chen Yang shouted in surprise and quickly stepped forward to greet him. Grandpa Huang smiled and reached out to touch Chen Yang's head, just like he used to do when he was a child. Good boy. You have grown a lot taller. Chen Yang felt warm in his heart, recalling the scene when his grandfather asked him to recognize Grandpa Huang as his godfather when he was a child. Although I don't know Grandpa Huang's real name, I only know that he is my grandfather's old comrade in arms. After retiring from the army, he had no children for some reasons and was unwilling to remarry. He settled down with his grandfather in Taiking village, relying on growing vegetables and government subsidies. Grandpa Huang lived a pretty good life. He often comes to our house and has become a member of the family. Chen Yang called both of them grandpa, and only added the word yellow when they were together to distinguish them. Lin Xingyi stood aside somewhat awkwardly facing so many strangers. Her body was shaking a little, not knowing how to deal with herself. Grandpa, Grandma, Grandpa Huang. There was a hint of nervousness in Chen Yang's voice. This is Lin Xingyi, my friend. When introducing himself, Chen Yang also switched from dialect to Mandarin. Lin Xingyi blushed and timidly followed Chen Yang in calling Grandpa and Grandma. Hello, Grandpa, hello, Grandpa Huang. The moment Chen Yang's grandparents saw Lin Xingyi, a hint of surprise flashed in their eyes. When people get old, they may think about having children of their descendants. If they have children, they want to have grandchildren. If they have grandchildren, they want to have great-grandchildren. Several old men looked at each other, as if communicating silently. Is this our future granddaughter-in-law? But no one said it explicitly. Grandma had a loving look on her face, her eyes moving back and forth between Chen Yang and Lin Xingyi. I seem to have started imagining in my mind the scene of holding my chubby great-grandson in my arms. I even wondered in my mind whether the set of gold bracelets could be given away. At this moment, Grandma suddenly remembered something inside. Oh, come to think of it, Xiao Han is almost 30 years old, and still has no partner in sight. This child only knows how to work, and doesn't know how to find a good family as soon as possible. When Chen Yang heard this, he scratched his head embarrassed, was about to say something to help his cousin out. The hustle and bustle downstairs could be heard on the second floor, and a slight noise came from the direction of the stairs on the second floor. Chen Yang saw a slim figure slowly poking her head out, with long black hair hanging down like a waterfall, setting off a delicate oval face. Those lively big eyes blinked, and the corners of his mouth raised slightly, revealing a sly smile. Sister, why are you here too? Chen Yang exclaimed in surprise. He didn't expect that she would return home. Xiao Qinghan slid down the stairs lightly like an elegant cat, wearing a loose white work shirt and a pair of denim shorts. With home slippers casually on his feet, he exudes a lazy and cute vibe. Yo, Yang Yang? Xiao Qinghan obviously didn't expect that when he asked Chen Yang what his plans were for the summer vacation, he didn't say he was going home. Seeing Lin Xingyi, Xiao Qinghan's expression when looking at Chen Yang had a hint of teasing. Chapter 60 Bleeding and Hair Plucking. Chen Yang felt his face burning up instantly, and he complained madly in his heart. It's over, how come my sister is home too? Originally if we brought Lin Xingyi here, and only her grandparents were at home, nothing would go wrong. Anyway, Lin Xingyi is standing next to me and I can't hide it anymore. So let it be. Lin Xingyi stood aside, and when she looked up and saw Xiao Qinghan's face clearly, her eyes wide and in her eyelashes trembled. A little surprised and a little at a loss. When the patient sees the doctor, it is like a student seeing his teacher, with an inexplicable sense of awe. Wait, isn't this Dr. Xiao? Lin Xingyi's heartbeat quickened, and a complex emotion surged in her heart. Chen Yang brought his own psychiatrist here as well? That's unlikely. He glanced at Chen Yang secretly, then quickly lowered his head, not knowing what to do. Lin Xingyi roughly knew that the two were siblings, but she didn't expect to meet them here. Xiao Qinghan slowly approached and saw Lin Xingyi's reaction. A glimmer of understanding flashed in his eyes. She smiled gently. Xingyi, I didn't expect to see you here. Lin Xingyi's heart was filled with turmoil. When she saw Xiao Qinghan approaching, her soft body trembled slightly. It's like a primary school student being scolded by his teacher. Xiao Chan didn't have the leisure to do so now, yet he was not wearing a white coat. He was naturally more casual. Just then, Grandma suddenly interrupted. Xiao Han, look, Yang Yang has brought his girlfriend back. When will you bring a son-in-law back for Grandma? Facing the daily pressure to get married, Xiao Qinghan shrugged helplessly. Grandma, I'm busy with work. Besides, there are so few good men nowadays. It is not easy to find them. Even if someone urges me to get married, I will just laugh it off and I still have to go home. Xiao Qinghan and Chen Yang are both grandchildren, but they take their mother's surname, so it is not Chen. Many years ago, Sister King Han's parents encountered some changes. so they let her take her mother's surname Xiao. Chen Yang secretly glanced at Lin Xin and found that she was looking at Xiao Qinghan with complicated eyes, as if she was thinking about something. I thought it would be better to get out of my cousin's sight for a while. Her gossipy eyes were really embarrassing. Lin Xingyi was already much more natural holding Chen Yang's hand, but Chen Yang seldom took the initiative and mostly just talked big. Now that Xiao Qinghan is watching from the side, I have to be more careful. Chen Yang took her around the yard and introduced the place where he grew up. He tried hard to ignore the amused look Xiao Qinghan gave him as he sat on the doorstep, but they could still feel those smiling eyes following them. Sister, please stop looking at it. Chen Yang couldn't help but complain, with a hint of unnaturalness on his face. We are truly innocent. Xiao Qinghan raised his eyebrows, and a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Oh, really? Then you guys are holding hands really tightly. Chen Yang coughed twice awkwardly, but couldn't let go immediately. Lin Xingyi was embarrassed by this, her cheeks flushed slightly, and she lowered her head to look at the floor. When young people return to the village, the elderly will prepare good wine and food for them. At this time, Grandma came over, and her figure just blocked Xiao Qinghan's gaze on Chen Yang. Yang, Grandma knows that you like eating goose the most. I'll go get the fattest one and make it for you tonight. Chen Yang's eyes lit up and he said excitedly. That's great. Thanks, Grandma. Lin Xingyi looked at the boy next to her with some curiosity. Chen Yang, do you like eating goose? When Lin Xingyi was having lunch with Chen Yang in the cafeteria, she had never seen this dish before. The main reason is that there is no goose meat in the school cafeteria. Chen Yang nodded, a trace of thought flashed in his eyes. Well, on the one hand, it's really delicious, and on the other hand, his voice dropped. Maybe it's because I was bitten by a goose when I was a child, and now eating it feels like revenge. After hearing this, Lin Xingyi couldn't help but smile and thought of some ancient poems she had read. I seem to have some understanding of the mentality of drinking their blood and eating their flesh. I made a mental note. Chen Yang likes to eat geese. Although Grandma was a woman, she had a pair of strong hands and she grabbed chickens, ducks and geese without mercy. Soon they clamped a pair of wings and caught a fat goose. Chen Yang ran over excitedly, ready to help. Whenever poultry and livestock were slaughtered, Chen Yang wanted to join in the fun. The somewhat bloody scene made something inside him feel excited. As the saying goes, a gentleman stays away from the kitchen. Chen Yang is obviously not a gentleman. Thinking of Lin Xingyi beside him, he turned around and spoke in a gentler tone. Xingyi, this might be a bit bloody. Why don't you go back to the house and rest for a while? Lin Xingyi hesitated for a moment. On the one hand, I am indeed a little scared of seeing the bloody scenes. But on the other hand, I want to learn how to handle the goose. After all, Chen Yang just said that he likes to eat this. I want to see. Lin Xingyi mustered up the courage to say. I'll just stand further away. It's okay. Chen Yang rubbed his hands and nodded. Well, if you feel uncomfortable, just leave immediately, okay? Lin Xingyi stood at the other end of the yard, watching Chen Yang and his grandmother bussying around. When I saw the bloodletting scene, I couldn't help but close my eyes and my heart was pounding. But soon, she mustered up the courage to open her eyes and tried to remember every step. I want to learn, I want to learn, I want to learn. Lin Xingyi muttered to herself in her heart, trying to hypnotize herself, but her eyes were a little vague and she didn't dare to lock onto the big goose whose life was fading. Chen Yang looked back at Lin Xingyi from time to time to make sure she was not feeling unwell. Xiao Qinghan also stood up from the threshold, rolled up his sleeves, and joined the ranks of processing the geese. She grabbed the goose's wings, held them in place and prepared to pluck its feathers. Chen Yang prepared hot water and tools, and they cooperated very well. If Grandma were to do it alone, it would be much slower as Grandpa is also preparing other ingredients. Seeing that she was the only one with nothing to do, Lin Xingyi wanted to help out but was rejected after all. It didn't make sense to ask a guest to do work. Lin Xingyi stood a little further away, observing the whole process curiously. Although feeling a little uncomfortable, he still forced himself not to leave after the bloodletting process. The scene was not so bloody. Xingyi, are you okay? Chen Yang turned around and asked softly. Lin Xingyi nodded and forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. Actually, it was pretty interesting. Are you okay? While plucking the hair, Xiao Qinghan imitated Chen Yang's speech in a pinched voice. Chen Yang elbowed her lightly without saying anything, indicating that he didn't want to pay attention to her. Several people continued to focus on the task at hand. The three of them handled it pretty quickly. After dealing with the goose, Chen Yang suddenly remembered something and patted his head. By the way, the rabbit is still in the car. Chen Yang put the rabbit he caught at the night market that day in the trunk before leaving, and stuffed a handful of vegetable leaves in it. I haven't taken care of it for 2 days, so it shouldn't be dead. Chen Yang hurried to the car, and took out a small cage from the trunk. A snow-white little rabbit was curled up inside, looking around vigilantly. Lin Xingyi walked closer and took a look. "Didn't you say you would give it to your parents to take care of for a while? I didn't expect you to bring it here. Most of the rabbits sold in traps at night markets are meat rabbits because they are cheap. This kind of rabbit is not suitable as a pet." Chen Yang thinks spicy rabbit head is its destiny, but it's still too young now. He looked at the rabbit in the cage. "I was thinking maybe I could stay here and be raised by my grandparents. What do you think?" Chapter 61 Persuasion. Lin Xingyi showed no reluctance and spoke to Chen Yang in the same tone as usual. "Well, I'll take your word for it." Chen Yang breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was not too worried that Lin Xingyi would object, he would have to take it back if Lin Xingyi was reluctant to do so. It's better to take care of your mood first. The rabbit is not important. Place the cage in a corner of your yard, making sure your rabbit has plenty of shelter and fresh air. The sun sets gradually. Various dishes were prepared one after another, and the aroma began to fill the yard. My grandparents' cooking skills are well deserved. My grandfather is good at cooking heavier dishes, while my grandmother is better at cooking lighter dishes. Various delicious aromas are intertwined together, whetting one's appetite. Grandpa warmly greeted the neighbors passing by the gate of the yard. "Old Wang, come and taste the good wine my grandson brought back." When Chen Yang drove away, he also took a few bottles of wine from his father Chen Jianjin. In fact, Chen Yang didn't really know what good wine was. But the wine that Chen Jianjin was reluctant to drink must be good wine. The neighbor smiled and waved his hand. No, I'll come back for a meal some other day." In the countryside, if a family has younger generations coming back, the place is so small that all the neighbors usually know about it. But generally not disturbing them and giving them time to spend together is also a kind of consideration. Finally, a sumptuous dinner was served on the table. Several dishes were made with goose meat alone, including a large plate of golden and crispy fried goose meat, which was filled with fragrance. Next to it was a bowl of steaming goose soup, with a few slices of tender green vegetables floating on the surface of the soup. There was also a plate of braised goose meat. The meat was tender and the sauce was rich. In addition to goose meat, the table was filled with other delicacies. A large plate of salt-baked prawns, the meat under the prawn shells was crystal clear. A plate of crisp and refreshing cold cucumber salad, adding a touch of freshness to the heavy-tasting dishes on the table, and a plate of jade tofu, tender and delicious, sprinkled with fresh shrimp and chopped green onions. Chen Yang looked at the food on the table and couldn't help swallowing. Turning to look at Lin Xingyi. "Try it, it must be delicious." There is no rule in Chen Yang's family that younger generations cannot eat first. On the contrary, the elders love children and always want them to eat first. Lin Xingyi was a little reserved seeing that others hadn't started eating yet. She didn't dare to take the first bite and just nodded. Chen Yang picked up a piece of goose meat and put it in front of Lin Xingyi. "Ah!" signaled Lin Xingyi to open her mouth. The two delicate lips opened and closed. The delicious taste bloomed on the tip of Lin Xingyi's tongue, and she couldn't help but let out a slight exclamation. "Tasty!" Lin Xingyi nodded like a little woodpecker. As everyone prepared to sit down in front of the fragrant dining table, Chen Yang glanced among the crowd and noticed that a familiar figure was missing. He frowned and asked, "Grandpa, why didn't Grandpa Huang come?" Grandpa waved his hands, with a helpless expression on his face. The old man was very stubborn and said he didn't want to disturb us. I persuaded him several times, but he just refused to come. "Forget it, let's eat first." After hearing this, Chen Yang felt a complex emotion in his heart. Grandpa Huang treated him as an outsider. As far as I can remember, apart from the fact that we are not related by blood, Grandpa Huang really treats me as his own grandson. I can't be your grandson in vain. No, Chen Yang said firmly. "I'll go ask Grandpa Huang to come." Having said that, Chen Yang stood up and walked out of the house. Lin Xingyi hesitated for a moment, but still followed him. She felt that it was safer to be around Chen Yang, and vaguely wanted to help. People who don't know would think that Lin Xingyi is Chen Yang's little follower. The two walked out of the yard and headed towards Grandpa Huang's house not far away. As night falls, there is still a faint sunset glow on the horizon, and the cool evening breeze blows across your cheeks, bringing a hint of freshness. Lin Xingyi secretly glanced at Chen Yang, but the light was dim, and she couldn't see clearly. Chen Yang frowned slightly, as if he was thinking about something, but his thoughts were interrupted by Lin Xingyi's voice. "Chen Yang, are you on good terms with Grandpa Huang?" Not knowing what to address him, Lin Xingyi just followed Chen Yang and called him that. Chen Yang nodded with a nostalgic look on his face. "Well, growing up, Grandpa Huang was like my second grandpa. He was my grandfather's comrade in arms and was very kind to me." After hearing this, Lin Xingyi couldn't help but feel a little admiration for this old man whom she had only met once. The place was not too far away, and soon the two arrived at Grandpa Huang's house. It was a two-story building that looked quite new. Although the yard was not big, it was kept tidy. There is a gentle slope at the door, replacing the traditional steps, and there are handrails next to it. Last year, the township government and the county government helped Grandpa Huang renovate his residence and installed barrier-free facilities in some places. Chen Yang pushed open the renovated courtyard door with ease and walked in with Lin Xingyi. There are several fruit trees planted in the yard, with lush branches and leaves. Obviously they are well cared for. The floor is paved with non-slip tiles, so you don't have to worry about slipping even on rainy days. These are all transformed with the help of the government, Chen Yang explained in a low voice. I still come to visit during festivals. Lin Xingyi nodded thoughtfully. Arriving at the door, Chen Yang took a deep breath and knocked gently. Grandpa Huang. It's me, Chen Yang. He shouted, anticipation in his voice. The two of them really get along like grandfather and grandson, with no need for any formalities or etiquette. Slow footsteps were heard from inside the door, and the door opened, revealing an energetic old man who appeared in front of the two. His back was a little hunched, but his eyes were unusually bright. Yang Yang. Grandpa Huang said in surprise, shouldn't you be eating? Chen Yang smiled. Grandpa Huang, I'm here to invite you to my house for dinner. Grandpa Huang showed an embarrassed expression on his face and waved his hand gently. Hey Yang Yang, just eat your own food. I, an old man, won't join in the fun. Besides, the rice in my pot is already cooked. It would be a shame not to eat it. When Chen Yang heard this, he suddenly felt a surge of sadness in his heart. I know that the elderly treat me as an outsider, and don't want to disturb their reunion. Countless memories flashed through Chen Yang's mind, including Grandpa Huang teaching him calligraphy, and accompanying him fishing. Bandaging his scraped knee, she said she learned it from a military doctor when she was young. Chen Yang took a deep breath, deliberately frowned, and pretended to be a little unhappy. Grandpa Huang. Chen Yang's voice was filled with a hint of grievance. If you don't go, I won't be able to eat. Can you bear to see me starving? Having said that, Chen Yang sat down directly on the sofa in Grandpa Huang's house. The movements seemed casual, but they revealed a firmness, as if saying that he would stay here and not leave. Lin Xingyi stood aside, a little nervous when she spoke, and agreed softly. Yes, Grandpa, please eat with us. This seemed to be the first time that Lin Xingyi took the initiative to talk to a stranger. When Grandpa Huang heard this, a hint of emotion flashed in his eyes, but he was still a little hesitant. Lin Xingyi discovered that when facing Grandpa Huang, she did not feel the usual discomfort she felt when facing strangers. It was as if she felt a natural intimacy with Chen Yang's relatives. After thinking about it, Lin Xingyi suddenly realized, maybe this is what they call loving someone and loving his dog. Love. Thinking of this, her fair and tender face couldn't help but feel slightly hot. Fortunately, other people's attention was not on her. When Chen Yang heard Lin Xingyi speaking for him, he looked at Lin Xingyi with gratitude. Then he turned to Grandpa Huang, using both soft and hard tactics, his eyes full of pleading. Grandpa, please just give me some face. Okay? Chapter 62, Peeling Shrimp. After hearing what Chen Yang said, Grandpa Huang just went along with it. He looked at Chen Yang kindly, then at Lin Xingyi, his eyes full of relief. Okay. I can't beat you young people, let's go have a meal, just to show my support for you. After hearing this, Chen Yang's face immediately broke into a bright smile. He jumped up and carefully held Grandpa Huang's arm. Very good. Grandpa, let's go now, don't worry about the rice in your pot. We will help you after we finish eating. Chen Yang carefully held Grandpa Huang's left hand, fearing that the old man would walk unsteadily. Maize inadvertently swept across Grandpa Huang's arm, where there was a scar about 20 centimeters long. It is light pink, and appears faintly under the dim street lights in the countryside. Although the scar has healed for many years, it is still clearly visible, as if telling a long-forgotten past. Grandfather, Chen Yang asked softly, is this scar on your hand the one Grandpa mentioned? The one from when you were in the army? When Grandpa Huang heard this, a glimmer of memories flashed in his eyes, and he smiled and nodded. Yes, it was left when I fought alongside your grandfather. That battle was so brutal. Lin Xingyi walked aside and listened quietly. When we got home, the scene became quite lively even before everyone started eating. When Grandpa saw Grandpa Huang coming, he immediately smiled teasingly. Oh, you said you couldn't come? What, did you change your mind? Grandpa Huang straightened his chest and pretended to be serious. I'm just giving face to my grandson. If Yan Yang hadn't come to invite me personally, I wouldn't have come. Chen Yang was not worried that they would really quarrel. The friendship between their comrades in arms after decades of friendship was closer than that between brothers. Sure enough, the next second the two old men smiled at each other. Chen Yang looked at this scene, breathed a sigh of relief, and quietly explained to Lin Xingyi, Grandpa Huang and my grandfather have been comrades in arms for decades, and their relationship is closer than that of brothers. Lin Xingyi nodded slightly, with some envy in her eyes. Having a friendship that can last for decades makes life seem much more valuable. While everyone was seated, Chen Yang took out his cell phone, adjusted the best angle, and captured the entire warm family dinner scene. I edited the text quickly, sent it to a group of only 3 people, and started to take credit. Dad, Mom, Grandpa and Grandma have been complaining about you not coming back. Not only did I invite Grandpa Huang to come, I also helped you eliminate Grandpa and Grandma's resentment. You have to give me a big red envelope. On the other side of the table, Grandma was mumbling about Xiao Qinghan. Xiao Qinghan said something in Grandma's ear, and then Grandma smiled happily and stopped mumbling about her. Although Xiao Qinghan took his mother's surname, the elders in his family were not conservative and did not treat him differently because of this. After dealing with the elders urging them to get married, Xiao Qinghan turned around and blinked at Chen Yang and Lin Xingyi. Hey, 2 young people, stop hiding in the corner and whispering to each other. Come and eat. Facing his cousin, Chen Yang was still a child. His face was a little red, and he stammered. We didn't. Lin Xingyi also lowered her head and dared not look at anyone. Xiao Qinghan was her doctor and Chen Yang's sister, which seemed like a complicated mixture. What is this? A relationship between relatives. Chen Yang and Xiao Qinghan sat on both sides of Lin Xingyi tacitly, silently forming a protective barrier for this somewhat shy girl. Chen Yang was halfway through his meal when his eyes fell on the plate of tempting salt-baked prawns. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he had an idea. He picked up the chopsticks, picked up a shrimp skillfully, and began to peel the shell with decisive and neat movements. Star ripples, Chen Yang said softly, putting the peeled shrimp meat in Lin Xingyi's bowl. Try it, my grandma's salt-baked shrimp is the best. Lin Xingyi felt a little embarrassed and whispered, thank you. I picked it up and took a bite. It's really delicious. Chen Yang saw that Lin Xingyi looked a little happy, as if she was doing it on purpose, so he continued to peel the shrimps attentively, glancing at Xiao Qinghan from time to time. One by one, fresh and tender shrimps were put into Lin Xingyi's bowl. Xiao Qinghan sat aside, his eyes rolling around with a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. She watched Chen Yang peeling shrimps skillfully and suddenly remembered something, and a nostalgic expression appeared on her face. But when he saw that Yang didn't peel any for him, the smile on his lips turned into a grieved oops. Xiao Qinghan sighed exaggerated. Back then, a little kid always asked me to help peel shrimps for him. Now you have learned how to please girls and have forgotten about me. Your sister. When Chen Yang heard this, the scene of being exploited by Xiao Qinghan when he was a child suddenly emerged in his mind. At that time, he always sat obediently beside his sister, peeling shrimps one by one. Xiao Qinghan, on the other hand, enjoyed the fruits of his labor with peace of mind. Thinking of this, Chen Yang pretended not to hear Xiao Qinghan's words and continued to concentrate on peeling shrimps for Lin Xingyi. Seeing this, Xiao Qinghan immediately put on a pitiful expression. She pouted her lips, with a look of grievance in her eyes. Looking just like an abandoned little girl. Who would have thought that the person making such an expression is actually a girl in her 30s? Yang, Xiao Qinghan said in a coquettish tone. How could you do this to your sister? I have loved you since you were little. Lin Xingyi felt a little embarrassed when she saw several peeled shrimps piled up in the bowl. But then she couldn't help laughing. She glanced at Chen Yang secretly and found that there was a sly smile on the corner of his mouth. She also realized that he was deliberately teasing his sister. Lin Xingyi silently picked up a shrimp and began to peel it carefully. Although her movements were not as skillful as Chen Yang's, they were full of seriousness and tenderness. After peeling, she gently placed the white shrimp meat in Xiao Qinghan's bowl. Sister Qinghan, Lin Xingyi said softly, with a shy smile on her face. You try it too. Lin Xingyi changed the way she addressed Xiao Qinghan. She used to call him Dr. Xiao. Xiao Qinghan felt that as a doctor, he was actually being taken care of by the patient. Xiao Qinghan was stunned for a moment, and then a hint of surprise and emotion flashed in his eyes. She looked at Lin Xingyi, then at Chen Yang. Okay. Yang, look at how sensible Xingyi is. Shouldn't you reflect on this? Chen Yang didn't expect Lin Xingyi's behavior seeing this scene. He couldn't help laughing. He shook his head helplessly. Okay, I give up. Good sister, I will peel one for you too. Chapter 63 Additional Psychological Treatment. At the dinner table, the elders' kind eyes would occasionally glance at the young people. Grandpa narrowed his eyes slightly, with a meaningful smile on his lips. From time to time, he waved the end of his chopsticks in front of Grandpa Huang, signaling him to listen to him. Grandma chewed slowly while looking at Chen Yang and Lin Xingyi with gentle eyes, and the wrinkles on her face were filled with happiness. Old Huang. Grandpa spoke, his voice full of memories. Do you still remember our Lao Li? I don't know how he is doing now. I couldn't get through to him a few days ago. Grandpa Huang put down his chopsticks. His eyes lit up. Oh, old Li, that's like I remember those days. The two old men chatted about their past. Although their voices were low, they were full of passion and nostalgia. The old man was once a passionate young man. After dinner, Chen Yang took the initiative to feed the dog. He picked up a large bowl, scooped a lot of leftovers into it, and then rinsed it with water several times to reduce the oil and salt. It will be healthier for dogs to eat this way. Then he walked into the yard, squatted down, and called softly, Da Huang, Da Huang, Da Huang. Come and eat. The big wolf dog ran over happily, breathing heavily and wagging its tail like a little windmill. Chen Yang smiled, touched its head, and put down the dog bowl. After touching the dog and washing his hands, Chen Yang returned to the house, smacking his lips, feeling like something was missing. Grandma, do we have canned yellow peaches at home? Grandma smiled kindly. It's already been prepared for you. It's in the kitchen cupboard. Chen Yang ran into the kitchen and soon came out with a can of yellow peaches. Carefully bypassing Xiao Han's sight, he came to Lin Xingyi. Xingyi, this is delicious, would you like to try it? As he spoke, he skillfully opened the can, scooped up a piece of golden pulp with a small spoon, carefully approached Lin Xingyi, and whispered, "Oh, open your mouth." There were people watching nearby. Lin Xingyi looked around, her eyelashes trembling slightly, as if she was making some important decision. Finally, he opened his mouth gently. Chen Yang gently put the fruit pulp into her mouth, and then asked expectantly, "How is it? Is it delicious?" Lin Xingyi chewed slowly, and her eyes gradually brightened, nodding with a sweet voice, It's really delicious. It's sweet and soft, and has a light fragrance." Chen Yang scooped up another piece of fruit pulp, and prepared to continue feeding Lin Xingyi. "After all, I brought him here, so I have to take better care of him." Xiao Han sat on the doorstep, feeling the draft, watching the scene without disturbing it, and a strange feeling arose in his heart. His eyes moved back and forth between Chen Yang and Lin Xingyi, watching them interact, and he couldn't help but feel touched. Maybe I should find someone to date? Xiao Han thought. It seems like life will become more interesting if someone is by your side. Right? This is the first time that the older sister, who is almost 30, has had this thought. Thinking of this, Xiao Han couldn't help but shook his head and smiled. As night falls, stars that are rarely seen in the city dot the night sky in the countryside. In the Chen family's yard, the chirping of crickets rose and fell, adding a bit of tranquility to this one night. Xiao Han looked around and coughed softly. There aren't enough rooms at home, how about Xingyi sleep with me? When Lin Xingyi heard this, her body stiffened slightly. His eyes unconsciously drifted towards Chen Yang, as if seeking some confirmation. Chen Yang just smiled gently, as if he couldn't decide on this issue. With a hint of encouragement in his eyes. I can't just say to my cousin, "No, I want to sleep with her." Lin Xingyi bit her lower lip, and her slender fingers twisted together unconsciously. She was far from being that familiar with Xiao Han, but there are really not enough guest rooms at home. She took a deep breath and nodded slightly. Okay, thank you, Sister King Han. The voice was as light as a feather, carrying a hint of uneasiness and anticipation. Xiao Han patted Lin Xingyi's shoulder gently and said softly, "You're welcome."